Well, it looks like we're live now. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our session today, Azure Virtual Desktop Research Insights with me, Blair Parkill, and my friend Jim Moyle from Microsoft. Today in this session, we're going to cover some of the most common questions that we get around Azure Virtual Desktop and how we can answer those questions with some of the testing that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years. And in terms of the types of things we're going to be covering, we're going to be looking at scalability, optimizers, logon storms, Windows 10 versus Windows 11, and Microsoft Teams. All of these things tend to be quite popular when we're engaging our enterprise crowd. My name is Blair Parkill, and you can find me presenting from all over the country via the web. Thank God for the technology stacks that were given today that enable me to do this. And during this presentation, I'll be presenting from the Los Angeles area. I'm a digital nomad, remote work enthusiast, as you can tell. I've got 4 places that you'll find me presenting from. And I am a systems engineering and strategic partnership employee here at Login VSI, where I cover a lot of the new technology and the partnerships that we engage in, and Microsoft being a big one of those that I'm working with on a daily basis. So I'll hand it over to you, Jim, to introduce yourself.
Thanks very much. As Blair said, my name is Jim Moyle, and I'm a senior program manager for the Azure Virtual Desktop product group. You can find me in all kinds of places on YouTube, Twitter, and GitHub. And if you're interested in running really long ways, then you can even find me on Strava. I came across to Microsoft through the purchase of the FS Logix technology and been at Microsoft ever since.
Right on. Jim, thanks for joining us today, and thanks for partnering with me on a lot of the research that we've been doing lately. It's been a ton of fun. So let's dive in. Let's take our first topic, and that has to do with session host scalability. As you might know, Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session, Windows 11 Enterprise Multi-Session, and AVD presents a whole new world when it comes to scalability and even technology. And in order to determine the scalability, we have an interesting tool here at Login VSI. It's called Login Enterprise. And what we do is we simulate a knowledge worker, a Microsoft 365 knowledge worker in this environment. And this knowledge worker can be deployed to a session host at scale, and it will log on and do a lot of the things that a normal user would traditionally do in an enterprise organization, such as most of us today. This worker will log in, browse the web, check email, review a spreadsheet, and even modify and edit a spreadsheet, write a report in Microsoft Word, create a presentation in PowerPoint, and it will cycle through all of these applications doing these tasks in order to kind of represent this real world user applying a workload against these session hosts. And what this allows us to do is see how the resources are used on the session hosts in order to determine at what point we reach that maximum scalability. And we'll obviously get a lot of information back about what that user experience is like. And we can determine, okay, this is our limit for scalability. We can also determine some other things, which I'll show you here on the next slide. Now, as I mentioned, Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session and Windows 11 Enterprise Multi-Session is really a whole new operating system. I mean, we've had remote desktop session hosts with Windows Server, but this is a client operating system, and we're now kind of deploying it at scale and having multiple sessions sharing that single operating system. So what you can do is throw out a lot of the old sizing guidance that you may have had for on-premises types of deployments. Now, in general, and what we're going to do is feed you some information here at a high level because we just don't have a lot of time. But I think it's going to prove useful in terms of how you decide to move forward and do some of this research on your own. So what we've seen in terms of the scalability, you'll see the 1x, 1.5x, and 2x, and that has to do with the number of sessions per vCPU in Azure that you're deploying your AVD resources onto. So if I have a 16 vCPU vCPU system, if I deploy 16 sessions to that session host, typically you get a feel of a modern laptop, one that's very responsive, great quality, great performance, all of that stuff. And even you'll have a little extra headroom in terms of resources to take on any additional workload on top of that. So typically at about a 1x sessions per vCPU, you're going to get a really good performance with a little headroom. Now, if I go to 1.5x, so on a 16 vCPU system, that's about 24 sessions. We think that's about the best price performance. So if I'm an enterprise and I want to deploy to get the best cost out of the system and also provide a good user experience, I'll probably start around a 1.5x per vCPU. And then lastly, if I don't care too much about this really great performance, but I really need high density and low cost, I might go even as high as 2 sessions per vCPU, or on a 16 vCPU system, about 32 sessions. And this is just general guidance. Your mileage is going to vary as you deploy your own bespoke applications or line of business applications on those session hosts. But this is intended to be kind of starting guidance, a place for you to start. Now, there's also some other information that we have for you around, instances and instance sizes. I mentioned in my example 16 vCPU. Also, 8 tends to be a pretty good target. If you're going as low as 4, that's good for a single session type of environment. If you're going as high as 32, I'd say just note that at 32 vCPU, you're going to spend a little more processing power on some of the synchronization tasks that happen. So we typically find the sweet spot to be between 8 and 16 vCPU. I personally test pretty much primarily on 16 vCPU and find that to be a great target. Now we have customers deploying on D series, whether that's the D, DS, DDS, D16AS, the V4, V3, V5, can be so many, but this general compute instance tends to be a really good target for AVD. F series has been one that we've seen some of our customers go for as well. The new NV A10 is a great choice, and we've got some statistics for you on that one. And the V5 is now available in Azure of many of these instances. And also, if you're looking for a great, per user, dollar per user per month, you may find that the V5 could be a really good target for you. Now, Jim, I don't know what you're seeing on the Microsoft side, but maybe you could help us understand where are you seeing some of your customers now and where do you see them going?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So when Blair and I sort of designed these tests, one of the things that we really wanted to do was test where the customers are today. So we looked at some of our telemetry, and these sort of D series 8 and 16, particularly 16 vCPUs, are really where our customers are today. And we wanted to give you as much good information as to your real world experience and what you should be experiencing in terms of Windows 11, Teams, etc. Maybe give you some advice as to which version, and have a look at the GPU accelerators as well. So yeah, we tried to come to you in terms of the testing rather than optimizing for some imaginary scenario that we're min-maxing for marketing effect.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Jim. Now, we're kind of tight on time. We'd love to kind of get into this a little more, and I'm sure at some other point in time, Jim and I will have more webinars on this. We've already done a few already, but let's move on. The next question has to do with Windows 11. Is it time for it, Jim? I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, so Windows 11 gives you a number of both user experience improvements, but one of the things that the enterprises are really looking for in terms of Windows 11 is the security implications of Windows 11. In Azure, now we can do the TPM version 2 chips. You can get all of that security goodness that you really need. Now, we're so used to in the IT world, right? You rev a version of software, you rev the version of the OS. It's not a question of, can I keep the same resources? It's usually a question of how much extra do I have to spend on this new version to keep my same user experience? And that's the question we were trying to answer with this set of testing.
Well, let's figure out what the answers were.
Yep. So we're actually looking better on CPU and better on logins as well. Login speed is improved from Windows 10 to 11. We talked about security. There's huge benefits for security, and we get better user experience as well, which is maybe surprising to people who are thinking about this and haven't done the testing that we've done, right?
Yeah, and I think if you look at system resource utilization, this was an interesting one, right? I mean, you kind of expect new operating systems to consume a little more resources, and in the testing that we did, we found Windows 11 to use, a little more memory than Windows 10 with the same number of sessions. And the next one, Jim, I think is kind of interesting, huh?
So just on that memory thing, so we wanted to present you. So we're not saying we're cherry picking everything that's the best. Yeah, you're going to need a little bit more memory for Windows 11, but let's face it, Windows multi-session is generally not bottlenecked on memory. It's generally bottlenecked on CPU. So this next graph, this is the really important one. And we're looking Win 10 versus 11. We can see Win 11 50.9, Win 10 57.9. Now, in terms of density and scalability, saving 8% on CPU can have a big impact on your bottom line and a big impact on your user experience. We can see along the bottom that this is 24 sessions on a 16 vCPU machine. Now, in
Yep.
terms of, sorry, go on, Blair.
Oh, I was just going to say, using our new EUX score, you can also see regarding a user experience that that Windows 11 does provide a slightly better comparative result, which is great news. And then Jim, the logons. I mean, pretty astounding that we were even able to kind of reduce that a little bit.
That's right. And to be clear, these are not OSs that we've tweaked and we've gone in and tried to change things to make these results look good. These are OSs that are dragged straight from the marketplace, no change. These are if you go and deploy a AVD host pool, these is the OSs that you will get. And these are results that you can replicate in your own environment. And we're saving a second of logon just by moving to Windows 10, Windows 11 from Windows 10.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, you look at the time there, 20 seconds versus 19 seconds, and that's using FS Logics as well. So I think, people would consider that to be a really good, time for logon. Well, speaking of logons, we've been getting questions about logon storms. Folks are wondering, how many sessions can I get started within a certain period of time? And that's certainly a very valid question. Some of the research that Jim and I had done was to figure out, okay, what interval is the best in terms of performance, and how tight can we make that interval? And if you look at what we have here from an end user experience score perspective, you can see that that it starts to lag when we try to fit, one session per 10 seconds. So if you're logging on a user every 10 seconds, you can see quite a dip there in user experience. But as we go out to one session per 30 seconds or even one session per minute, the user experience becomes very consistent. And I think it's it's a pretty interesting thing to look at, especially when you consider, how do I facilitate a heavy, logon load? How would we typically go about getting that, Jim?
So, I mean, in certain scenarios, and it depends on your company culture, right? There is some companies where everybody, they have to be bang on 9 a.m., right? And in other company cultures, look, as long as you're on in the morning, you do your core working hours, then you can spread your logons around over a long time, and this may not be such a problem for you. If you are in that situation where you've got a company culture that is like, no, everybody logs on bang on 9 a.m. In that case, what you want to be doing is you want to be architecting your solution so that you can spread your logon interval out to probably around 30 seconds. Anything less than 30 seconds, you may start to get some resource constraints. Anything above 30 seconds is fine. You're going to have no problem. So I think it really depends on your individual company, how important this is to you. But it's great to know where you should be aiming for in terms of your logon interval.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. It can really have an effect on performance. And just to take a quick look at where does that reduction in end user experience come from on that performance constriction, you can see here if we look at the CPU for each of those logon intervals, the ramp up at the very beginning of the test where all of the users are logging in for the 60 and 30 seconds, we're not quite reaching 100%. So there's no bottleneck in that case from a CPU perspective. But at 10 seconds, you can see that as we're starting up things like the Apex registration service or even other things like Teams, can all contribute to, a ramp up in CPU utilization. So this is the thing that you want to be careful of and to spread out so that you don't hit that bottleneck and impact your user performance.
And this just
There's,
sorry, and
yeah,
this
go
just
ahead.
like confirms what we were sort of saying before, that CPU is your main bottleneck in a multi-session OS. So exactly as Blair's saying, this is the metric you want to be watching.
Yep. And Jim, I know a lot of people are wondering, if I'm going to use, a roaming profile or profile containers with FS Logics, what's the impact to logons?
So this is super interesting, right? Because people are used to, a roaming profile where you've got to go and download a whole lot of stuff. FS Logics is a mount, and it doesn't really matter whether your profile is 300 megs or 30 gigs in size, right? The logon impact of that profile is the same. And we've got a lot of data from customers and showing really detailed logs. Maximum time is usually a second. Your average time is usually way under that, under half a second in terms of logon impact for loading a full, 30, 40, 50 gig FS Logics profile.
Yep. I personally don't want to test Azure Virtual Desktop ever again without FS Logics. It just made life so much easier, and I'm sure that would be the same case for a lot of the users using Azure Virtual Desktop. So, yeah, definitely good on FS Logics for providing all of those benefits. Um, okay, so let's kind of get into our next question, which is, should I be using an optimizer? And in the last few sessions that we've done, this has been a consistent question because we've gotten into the practice of using optimizers to really gain back some of the performance that we may need to kind of give a little more scalability and regain a little more cost. Now, Azure Virtual Desktop with the Win 10 or Win 11 session host is definitely going to provide, it's going to require a lot of resource utilization. But we have found something interesting here that the AVD team does seem to be hard at work at making sure that their images are doing really well in terms of performance. In fact, when tested with the Windows Virtual Desktop Optimization tool, by Microsoft, we found that really the benefit is not is it. I'd say there's really no benefit to running that optimizer. I'm not saying the optimizer is not beneficial. I'm just saying the images that I'm using for Windows 10 and 11 Enterprise Multi-Session are already so highly optimized that it's not worth kind of popping that or that optimizer on there to regain any performance because it's just didn't show in the data. If you look at the end user experience score, 7.2 versus 7.1, really not a big difference. You can see the CPU utilization during logon storm. Again, not something that was very different. Steady state is something that we look at. So after everybody's logged in, what's the difference? There's a little bit of a difference there that the optimizer gave us, but this could also be a little bit of test variability. When it comes to memory, also, you can actually see that, yeah, less memory used with the optimizer, but again, just a very small amount. And the number of sessions that you can get for VSI Max, you can see 29 versus 26. So it's a very mild performance, but as Jim and I have talked about together before, optimizers, are something you want to be careful about. Jim, maybe you have a couple words about that.
Yeah, so There's some interesting things that happen when you use Optimizer. They effectively they turn a whole lot of stuff off, right? That's how they work. Um, I've been looking and reviewing support cases where the people have got in trouble because they've not realized that search is being turned off, or even defrag. Why would I need defrag? It's a virtual hard disk, but if you're using an FSLogix profile and maybe you're using something to shrink that FSLogix profile, it needs to be defragmented before you can shrink it. So we've had people say this doesn't work, that doesn't work. They're raising support cases, and it's because they've used an optimizer, they've not quite realized exactly everything that it does, and it's caused them trouble. So my general advice is don't use it. If you really need these marginal gains that Blair's talking about, then fine. I've no problem with it. But just be very careful, because I would say for a lot of companies, the risks may outweigh the benefits for using optimizers.
Yep. Cool. Thanks, Jim. Okay. We have one more that has been probably the most popular question that we've received here at Login VSI from a number of our enterprise customers and a lot of the vendors that we work with, which is how does Teams impact the performance and scalability of my Azure Virtual Desktop solution? Obviously, with unified communications becoming very, very ubiquitous here because of our new work from home culture that's been kind of pushed along by the pandemic, we're finding that these types of tools are now just pervasive and business critical. So when you couple something like Microsoft Teams with Azure Virtual Desktop and the Microsoft 365 Office suite, obviously there's going to be a change in the performance profile of the system. So in our latest project that Jim and I have been working on, we've been looking at that impact. So we've got a few different examples that we'd like to share with you that kind of highlight that. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind that as you're installing Teams in Azure Virtual Desktop, it comes with the Microsoft 365 apps and AVD Win 10 and 11 Enterprise Multi-Session Marketplace images. So it's already on. And it's done as a machine-wide install, which means that all users that log in onto that session host already have Teams installed and ready for them. And it's also configured to automatically start. So when a user logs in, Teams is going to pop up and say, hey, would you like to log in and get started with Microsoft Teams? And obviously that auto start at logon is going to have an impact on performance. So let's take a look at that. Now, this first test is on more of a legacy, a very popular system, D16DS V4. Um, and you can see that the end user experience in the table to the left without Teams is a 7.2. But when we add Teams, you can see that draw-on performance causes a little more lag. And we got about an 11% drop in end user experience there with the same number of sessions. So we're looking at 24 sessions on a 16 vCPU system. Now that's to be expected, right? I'm adding another application and that application consumes resources. Now, if we look at those resources, you can see the CPU utilization and you see the SS there as a superscript. That means steady state. So after everybody's logged in, we've gone from about a 58% utilization to about a 77% utilization, which is a 33% uplift. So obviously Teams is consuming more resources. So these are some of those numbers that you've been asking for. From a memory perspective, also a 20% increase in memory utilization from 69 to 83. Now, again, we're just adding another application here, and we would expect it to consume more resources. So this is right in line with what we would have expected. Now, there is one thing that I do want to highlight, and if you look at the end user experience performance chart on the right side, you can see the two blue lines kind of moving from left to right, and you can see the Azure Virtual Desktop Knowledge Worker with Teams is that bottom line. You see it dip a little heavier at the beginning. That's when the user is logging in. And when you couple that log on with Microsoft Teams automatically starting, obviously you're going to compound the amount of work that that session host has to do to start a user up. So this dip is definitely impacting some of that performance. The second dip is when they start using Teams. And that's why it's important to take a look at steady state as well. But Jim, one way to kind of mitigate that heavier drop in login performance would be, could we mess with auto start or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. So if you are under resource crunch at a logon storm, then making sure that Teams doesn't auto start can actually give you a lot more breathing room, a lot more headroom in your logon storms. Um, but there is another thing that we can do that I know we've got on the next slide, haven't we, Blair?
Yeah, let's hit that. So
So
go ahead, Jim.
so we know that a lot of our customers are maybe on the D16s, but there's a huge amount that are still on the V3s. Now we tested on the V4s. Now V5s are they're not new, but they're our latest version. They are the same price, and we can see even with Teams being auto started for the same price by just moving from a V4 to a V5 of exactly the same SKU. We've actually equalized out the performance, and we can see in the EUX score that yeah, just a simple SKU change. And this is one of the advantages of cloud, right? You're not stuck with the hardware you bought 3 years ago. You can change as soon as you want to the next version and get these advantages for what is exactly the same price.
Um, yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, it's such an easy move. It's a no-brainer. And yeah, these V5s are definitely adding enough performance to add teams and not have to change our cost per user.
We
That's
got a
great.
couple of minutes left, by the way, Blair.
Yep.
So
Yeah, so we just have one more slide. The NV series is certainly a new and I'd also say an increasingly popular instance that we've been looking at. You could see just without Teams, this NV 80S 1880 SV5 is providing an end user experience at an 8.0, which is just incredibly high. It's a very good user experience. And with Teams at 11% drop, still at 7.1 is still a very good user experience. So if you look at it, I think Jim, it's only a $5 extra a month per user to enable a user with this NV80S, which gives them GPU and a bunch of other benefits. I'd say it's a definitely a viable option.
Absolutely. If you're looking to improve your user experience, you can get more density on these NV SKUs, and you can maintain or raise up your user experience for a very small incremental cost per user. So if you're really looking to impress your users, absolutely consider these new NVV5s, and they're on an A10 GPU as well.
Yeah, right. We definitely will be coming out with some more information around this. I find it to be a fascinating area, especially when we talk about GPU utilization and things like Teams, and even other media-rich type of workloads. So, looking forward to doing more of that. So,
Um,
yep, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say we've just got a minute or so left. I just wanted to cover off a couple of questions. I think we were
Sure.
just going to move to that, weren't we?
Yep.
Um, so one question, is the CPU and memory data collection making its way to Login Enterprise?
Yeah, that is something that we're researching right now, and CPU data collection can come from a number of places. So it can come from in the session with the user. It can also come from the session host. So we're looking at that, and if you are interested in what the timing of that might look like, please reach out to us. Um, so next
Thanks,
question.
Blair. Yeah, so this next question, I guess, is for me, which is what are the status of the Teams 2.0 revision? Unfortunately, this is not an NDA session. So if you would like to know what the roadmap stuff is for Teams, then please contact your account team and we can arrange an NDA session for you. And the last question is NV plus A10, is this a GPU-driven profile? And absolutely, yep, that's it. Any SKU starting with NV means that it is GPU driven. The latest ones is an AMD CPU with an NVIDIA GPU.
Yeah.
So that's all the questions.
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind with the NV series is that if you want to use that GPU, don't forget to install the NVIDIA Grid drivers. They are not installed by default yet. So if you want to enable that benefit, make sure that you grab those drivers. Microsoft certainly has a good article on how to make that happen.
Great
Cool.
tip. And I think that's the end of our time. If you want to know more about AVD, there's a link there documentation, and I think you've got a Login VSI slide to find out more about demos and stuff. And that's the end of our time. Thank you so much for coming and joining us for this session.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Take care.